Good evening. God bless you. We thank you for joining us here tonight for another one of our Never Alone live events with Apostolic Moral Purity, aka AMP. So we thank all of you for joining us. And as we say every time we come together, we're very passionate about this ministry and being allowed to be involved in the process of healing and restoration for all of our participants. And we very much want to see healing in your life or somebody that you know who's dealing with pornography addiction or sexual addiction. So we strive to provide a safe space, if you will, creating a safe space for everybody who is involved. So thank you for joining us here tonight, because we want you to know that you are not alone. There is hope. So we're very excited about our session here tonight. I think it's going to be very good. There's going to be some great energy generated here amongst our special guests from the state of Tennessee. Actually, Dr. Surstad, we're dominated by Tennesseans here tonight. I see. God help us. Anyway, Dr. Surstad, it is great to see you here tonight. How are you doing?
Doing well. Great to be here again with you fine gentlemen. Excited about what we're going to deal with tonight.
Amen. Thank you. And thank you for calling us fine gentlemen. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. By faith, always by faith.
Well, Brother Evan Miller, God bless you. Great to see you here tonight.
Great to be here again, and thank you, and super excited about tonight. I think it's going to be a great session.
Amen. I believe that. So why don't you introduce our esteemed guests and tell them who exactly we're going to be speaking with here tonight?
Okay, I'll do that. The two guests that we're going to be interviewing tonight are two gentlemen, fine gentlemen that I have known for many years. And I'm going to mention Bill Mathis first. Bill I've watched him grow up in our church here in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. And I've watched his life. I've watched his life progress, and so thankful for what God has done in his life and where God's brought him to. And he is currently the youth pastor, student pastor at Goodlettsville Pentecostal Church, and doing a fantastic job with the young people. And we're so excited to have him here with us tonight, and looking forward to his input as we talk about pornography as it relates to youth. And so we're going to swing in that direction tonight. Also, Brother Billy Haley is my son-in-law, and I'm super excited to have him with us tonight. And he spent, 11 years, Billy, as youth pastor at Goodlettsville Pentecostal Church, and has been involved with the youth here for quite some time. Bill has been the youth pastor for the last 4 years, I think, right around 4 years. And so they've worked very closely together for several years, and grateful for their passion for God, their passion for youth. And so just super excited to have both of them with us, and we're looking forward to what God's going to do through tonight's session.
Amen. We're excited to be here. I'm obviously excited to be with you, Pops. I call him Pops. It's my father-in-law, and then it's an honor to do this with Bill. Great friends, been on the journey together for a long time. So this is we were reminiscing earlier. This is a cool moment for us to be able to do this together, and obviously an honor to be with you, Brother Surstad, and you, Brother Tracy. Been looking forward to this for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Just excited to dive in and to get to talk with you guys tonight. So appreciate this opportunity to spend the night with you, you fine gentlemen. So
You.
Well, great. Well, let's dive in. Bill, you work with the students, the youth, and young adults at Goodlettsville Pentecostal Church, and work in that demographic. So what do you see as the biggest challenge around the topic of pornography?
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot here I think one of the biggest things is you talk about pornography in the day and age that we're in. I think just the view of pornography has changed. Obviously, as the church, we recognize the sin nature of porn, but I think as a culture, where our students are growing up in, they're growing up in a much more porn accepting culture. I'm a big statistics guy. I know that's not for everybody, but I think it's helpful to kind of just shape when we're talking about these things. Barna did a study on teenagers and how their friends view pornography, and I was honestly just looking through some of their work. I'm just completely shocked at what they found, and the number that they gave was that 89% of students, so just in the teenage demographic, 89% say that their friends, when they talk about pornography use, viewing pornography, that they either see this in a neutral or a positive way. So they're either seeing this as there's nothing really wrong with it, or it's something that's celebrated or normal. And so, I think one of the biggest challenges for students is they're growing up with people who they don't see an issue with it. So as something that maybe they're struggling with, walking through, and obviously all the shame and the secrecy that can surround that, then they're seeing this kind of almost, paradoxical view of it from the other side, that their friends at school are saying, well, this isn't really that bad, or this is normal. This is just, what we do. Even I think maybe the definition of what is porn, is totally different now. That what is almost just accepted as normal as things that you're going to see, sexually explicit or revealing or provocative or whatever you want to say, things that you just see in your day-to-day life. At one point would be no question that is, pornographic in nature, but now it's just the culture that we live in. And so I think, you're dealing with a lot of these different definitions and views. And so that can be for a teenager, even an apostolic young person, that can be confusing, especially if they're not hearing maybe the conversation around pornography or getting the teaching on this that they need to think, well, is this normal? Is this a part of just growing up and discovering sexuality and sexual expression? And so I think the biggest challenge is just, understanding that there is the sin element of pornography. And we'll talk later on about, how to take away the secrecy and some of those types of things. But, I think just understanding that it is sin, I think is a huge challenge that they're facing right now.
So Billy, chime in on that. What do you think the mindset of students relating to pornography is today, and why is it more prevalent?
Yeah, I would agree with Bill. Whenever I read that question, about the mindset of kids or students or young adults, the first word that came to my mind was indifference. Mm-hmm. Like there's a growing indifference toward pornography. I think there's also an undermining, Bill, you mentioned this, of whether or not it is actually even a problem, a sin, something to even be overcome or be freed from. And it makes sense because really there's the world that we're living in. You guys work in this, this. There's so much access to explicit content today. It seems like any app, any device, any video game, like whatever you can plug in and get internet on, there's a great probability that it can get to porn in some way. And so many young people, teenagers, they encounter porn, whether accidentally, and then it becomes casual to the point that it can almost be viewed as just the normal part of their life. Pornography, it's just normalized now. It's just a part of our society today, and it's this growing indifference. And then also, I think there's a desensitization that's happening around this, right? From what students and young adults hear in their classrooms to what they see in movies, depending on what kind of movies they're watching, or television shows that they're watching or that their parents are allowing them to watch. Especially social media. I think social media is just it's a hot topic for inappropriate content that we're just not talking enough about. And even the lyrics, if you look at lyrics in music, I mean, all of this stuff in the realm of entertainment and media, it's just screaming desensitization around the topic of sexuality. And then you have these teenagers, these young adults who are wrestling with their own identities, who are wrestling with their own sexuality. And so I just see a growing indifference and a desensitization to the topic. And I know that sounds super negative, right? Like that's not a super positive take. Like, it's all doom and gloom. But I do think there's another side to that conversation too that I see. There's a different mindset that I also see growing as the world is on fire and it's in that realm of porn and all of this stuff. I don't know that that's the case for all teens. I don't think indifference is the case for all teens and young adults. I think there's another segment, as prevalent as porn is in our society. I think there's a whole other segment of teenagers and young adults that it's pushing us into more conversations about pornography. It's pushing us into more conversations about bringing awareness to this, which I believe is ultimately part of the answer to this problem. And that's bringing awareness, shining a light on it, getting it out of the darkness. And what I see on the other mindset is, whether it's in the teens or in the adults or in leaders, it's really forcing us into more conversation about this, because this idea of porn or inappropriate content or whatever, soft porn, hard porn, whatever it is, it's so in your face. So we almost have to talk about it.
That's a great point. And they definitely are inundated with it from all angles. And it's an epidemic. It's crazy. And I know parents, they have a huge role that could be intimidating to them. Brother Mathis, or Bill, I'm not sure what you want me to call you, but pastor, I was a youth pastor 17 years in Maryland. This issue was not anything like it is now. And so in your experience, and we were youth pastors, now I guess we're student pastors. It's school, youth pastor. But in your experience in student ministry, what age do you think is appropriate to start talking about dangers of pornography? What would you say?
Yeah, I think this is such a tough topic, because you obviously, for a lot of parents, you want to be careful how you approach this with kids, because I know the phrase is innocence leaks, and so you want to protect innocence. But the other side is, I'll say this, that if your kid has access to smart devices, tablets, they've got a Switch, an Xbox, whatever the device is that can connect to internet. And Brother Billy had alluded to this. Then the time to have this conversation was probably, a few days ago, or at least a few weeks ago, because if you have any kind of access to internet, then not even knowingly you can stumble across these things. And so I think it does vary. I'll say that I think if you're looking for like a number, I think the earliest access that at this point, that studies show that students have to porn is at the age of 8. And so, I don't think you necessarily have to have these conversations full on with an 8-year-old, but starting to have conversations about what's right and what's wrong, to me, I think seeds the conversation to go deeper into these tougher conversations. I do think we, obviously we recognize, Brother Tracy, all of us on here who have been in student ministry, the importance of student ministry, and we would vouch for that any day of the week. But I do also know that the role of parents is so crucial, that our goal is hopefully to supplement what's happening in homes. And so your prayer is that from an early age, you're having conversations about right and wrong in general, about respecting people and understanding the differences between, men and women, and what we say, what is right, what the Bible teaches. I think what that does is when you start to have those conversations, I think it gives you insight into where your kid is and maybe where they're at, some of the things that they're struggling with. It gives you an insight into their awareness. And then at that point, I think he opens up the door for that conversation. But I will say, I don't think later is the right call. I don't think on graduation night, I don't think that is the right call. I think I would suggest if they're old enough to be in youth group, if they're old enough to be in that youth group age. I know it's different for some, and it'll be different for some students, but I think starting to open the conversation about technology and about, the dangers that are out there, because at the end of the day, it's not just about, we don't want our students just to not make mistakes, but we want them to live in freedom. We want them to live in purity, and to recognize that God does have that plan for each person to live in that purity. And so I do also know this, that kids will be discipled about sex somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That there's going to come a point where they're getting their conversation, they're teaching, and unfortunately, probably for a lot of us, maybe that didn't happen in homes. It happened in locker rooms, or it happened in classrooms, or it happened on Fortnite group chats, or whatever the case is now. But I do recognize that they will be discipled about sex somewhere. So I think it's important too, from moms and dads in homes with moms and dads, to make sure you're on the same page about that, to have dialogue with one another, and to make sure that you have a plan to know, hey, like, I noticed that they're taking an interest in these things, or they're noticing these things more, and just to pay attention. And so I would say sooner rather than later. I think 12 and 13, I think, is, especially if they're asking, or they're wanting to have access to technology. Again, all of that needs to probably be done with a lot of guardrails, a lot of boundaries and understanding. But I would say that the sooner that you're able to have those conversations, it doesn't hurt your student. Again, you don't have to be graphic, and you don't have to be crass, but I think you can be honest in those tough conversations, and it helps them out. Then they have an understanding, a warning. I mean, it's the same thing to say, I'm not going to tell my kid about, a hot stove, because that's a dangerous thing, right? That's dangerous. And I don't want them to be exposed to that danger. Well, the other side is they need to know that danger exists, so they can have the knowledge to stay away from that danger. They stay away from that situation. So I would encourage parents that it's not too, if you're at 12, 13, I don't think that's too late. And probably for some situations and some circumstances, I think it's even appropriate to have that even younger.
The average age, let me just insert this. The average age for male and female masturbation is between 11 and 13. So I'm thinking that 11 even it's too late well, not too late, soon, but sooner. With the world that we live in, the age that we live in, we gotta be looking earlier, I think. But good response. I appreciate your input there.
Brother Billy, not to be confused with Bill, but
Yeah.
he did just say, he said two key words. He said hard conversations. And we're parents. I've actually met your family, your kids, just this last year. And knowing that this is such an important topic, and knowing the seriousness of it, why do you think it's so hard for our parents to have that hard conversation? Why is it maybe it's a hard time for them to chat with them? Why do they struggle with that so much?
It's interesting, because I was youth pastor for 11 years and probably had a good idea of what parenting was going to look like for teenagers, because we always joked when we first got into youth ministry. We became youth pastors like a few months after we got married, essentially, and people would ask us for the first several years of our marriage, like, when are you guys going to have kids? And I would always joke, like, I'm I don't have time to have kids. I'm too busy raising yours, just kidding. I wouldn't say that, but I would say we literally have, we have a whole group full of kids. We don't need kids. But through all of that experience, I always thought, man, I have the answers to all these parent problems after helping with their kids. And now, I'm not a youth pastor anymore. I'm a dad. I have 3 amazing kids who I love very much. And it's amazing how, I wouldn't say perspective has totally changed, but it's definitely a different perspective whenever you're raising kids in your home. And to answer your question, honestly, it's a loaded question because I think it varies. It has various answers. One of the reasons I think that it's such a hard conversation is because a lot of parents, they've never been taught how to have that conversation. Chances are they may have not ever had the conversation with their parent. They probably got their education, on the quote unquote streets, in the locker room, online, through Hollywood. And we obviously know that's a very tainted perspective. And so I think that's part of it. A lot of parents haven't had great models for how to have this conversation. The reality is it was taboo in a lot of homes, over the last, decades. It was just something you didn't talk about. I'll tell a quick story and I'll give you the very clean version of it. My wife and I got married. It was amazing. We were on our way. I was 24 years old. We left the reception. My wife cried when we left the reception, which was really a really awesome way for me to start my marriage. I look over in the car and my wife is in tears. I'm like, what? I'm headed to our first night as a married couple and she's crying. So I later understood she just really loved her family very, very much. But we were on our way to the hotel for our first night of marriage, and my phone rings, and it's my dad. And you got to understand, I'm 24 years old, and my dad, for whatever reason, I answered the phone. I have no idea why. Why did I answer the phone? But I did. And my dad says, "Hey, how's it going?" Which is an awkward question, right? And so I said, "Well, it's good. We're on our way to the hotel." He said, and I kid you not, 24 years old. He said, "Well, I was just thinking, is there anything you need to know?" And that was the first hint of the talk. That was the first time I had ever even heard anything related to a sexual education, about my sexuality, about any of that from my dad. And really, I laughed about it in the moment, have made jokes about it, since then. But I think my eyes have been open to it even more so now that chances are my dad never had anyone talking to him about it. So he didn't have a clue. I had a good dad. I had a great man, but it was taboo. And so I think that's why it's hard for a lot of parents, is because they haven't been taught. There hasn't been the resources that we have now about educating parents on that talk. I think another reason, just being honest, is it's really awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I have kids now. Through the years, I met with lots of young men who were struggling with pornography. I remember a young man in my office and talking about his struggle with pornography. And I asked him if his parents had ever talked to him about this. And he said, this kid was 18. He said, "No, my dad never talked to me about any of this." And so I know it can be a really awkward conversation. And I thought going into it, like, I've had all these conversations with, guys who've struggled with this topic. It's going to be no problem. And now I have a 9-year-old, and it's intimidating. That's my son, right? That's his emotions. That's his brain. That's his innocence. And so it's an intimidating conversation, but it is necessary. Thankfully, we have strong safeguards in our home that I think is helping. But I already can see at 9 years old, like, that conversation is coming. I can tell whether it's a billboard that we pass going down the road or an inappropriately dressed lady walking down the sidewalk, and I see his eyes already. I see what he sees and what he notices, and we're already acknowledging that and having those conversations. But the reality is it's just awkward. It's not easy. And then the last reason I think it's hard is, and this is a tough one to say, but I think it's true, is some parents, they have a hard time talking about this topic because it's something they're personally struggling with themselves.
Mhm.
There's a reason that a lot of dads can't talk to their little boy about pornography because they don't have victory over it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why there's dads that can't really have conversations with their daughter about their value and their beauty and their holiness because they're struggling with pornography themselves and they feel like a fraud. They feel like they have no moral authority in the subject. And that's a challenge, because what that does is it creates a cycle that can quickly become this generational problem, because you feel like you don't have a voice in the topic. You feel like you don't have authority in the topic. You don't have any answers to provide. So ultimately, I think it's hard because it's just something they don't talk about because they can't.
Bill, what he just said too, he was talking about the difficulty, people struggling with it, not wanting to talk about it. But I know you would agree with this, that the silence and not talking about it, coupled with the condemnation, creates this fertile ground for sin to really flourish and to grow. And the secrecy, all that working together just thrives and just grows. So how would you what would you say to providing a safe space or a safe place for students to be able to share things that they are struggling with?
Yeah, right. That's a great question. I think first off, for any parent who is listening or is trying to figure out, how do I do this? I think just say, we applaud you, because I know there can be a lot of sometimes it feels maybe like a lot of like shame or beating up on parents. But for any parent who's listening and saying, I want to have these conversations, I know it's hard, but I want the best for my kids, I applaud you and say, I think that's a godly desire. So, but I do recognize that the environments and the spaces that we create for these conversations, one, determine whether they'll happen in the first place, and two, determine if they'll continue to happen, and the depth of connection you can have in those. And so I would say the first thing is, as parents, as people who are engaging in these conversations, we need to make sure that our view of sex and sexuality is healthy, because I think it can be really easy to take a kind of a shame view of sex. But when we look at it, I think I've heard our pastor say this so much, that the devil didn't create sex. God created it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the devil can't create anything. He just perverts what God creates, right? Yeah. So I think understanding that, okay, and sex inherently is not evil. It was created by God as this celebration, as a way to produce, to be fruitful and multiply, and also as this example of the intimacy that God wants with His creation. So I think understanding that sex in and of itself is not evil, but in the context of what God created it to be, is something that's supposed to be celebrated. I think the mindset of that helps when you're in these conversations, because then you get to speak to those things and say, well, the reason why pornography is such a detriment to our health, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, it is because it's a perversion of what God intended for this. And God does want you to experience this in the confines of marriage between a man and a woman. And when you experience it that way, then it can be something that is celebrated. It can be something that's good. So I think just the mindset going into these conversations, I think, is so important. And two, I'll say, I think the way that we respond to other conversations or other topics or other times that our kids mess up, I think the way we respond in those settings, I think, open the door for these conversations, or they close the door for these conversations. I just to be truthful, and I Billy and I were just having a conversation about this before we hopped on, and I'm married, been married for about 4 years now at this point. And well, I'll say I've been married for almost 5 years. Better get it right. So, we don't have kids at this point. We have a dog that we're trying to get to heaven. So he's a work in progress. So, but for us, we try to approach these conversations with a ton of humility and a ton of grace, because I recognize we're not parents. I understand that, but I do recognize that for any of us, we can have times where we don't respond in the moment, in a relationship with our spouse, with our kids, with our family, with friends. We all don't always respond in the moment the way that we would like to, but what I recognize is how we respond determines if we're going to get an opportunity to have some of those deeper conversations later on, because you either foster trust or you don't foster that. And so I say all that to say that I just would encourage that parents and again, I know, we just got back from Youth Congress not too long ago, and I was telling Billy, you spend a few days with students. We love our students so much, but you spend 4 days, running around, keeping the tight schedules, doing this and that. And by the end of it, you're like, all right, Lord, we got to pray for a little patience here. But what I recognize is that when mistakes happen, whether it's something we consider small or not, how you respond in that moment, I do think can help open the door for those conversations. Because then a student recognizes, okay, I messed up, and this was a mess up. But when I messed up, I forgot to take out the trash that one day, and mom and dad they reminded me, they disciplined me, they did whatever, but the way they responded, I know I can bring this to them, and I can have this conversation. And I think too, another part of this is just to ask questions and to listen. I think that listening is one of the best ways that we can create trust in any relationship, but specifically in this, because when we ask questions and we listen to our students, sometimes you're going to hear, they might not always say what you're wanting them to say, but you can hear beyond just the words if you're listening, you're paying attention. And I know that it can be tough. And again, I just would say I would applaud any parent trying to have these conversations. But I recognize too that it's not just for parents, but even in the church, we need to make sure that we are a safe place for people to bring their mistakes and their shortcomings. It's through the confession. It's through the confession of our faults to one another that there's healing. And so I think that when we recognize that we're not trying to just react when someone is saying this to us, but when we listen and we bring humility, when we bring a heart that is at the front, the foremost is love for this person, and recognizing that they're dealing with this, whether it's pornography or whatever the case is, so any sexual addiction, that at the end of the day that we wanted them to know that we love them, we're for them, and that we're willing to walk through this with them. And I think that does help create those safe places. And that is my prayer, that we would continue to create those, because these conversations need to happen. And I, applaud you gentlemen for continuing to open these doors for these conversations. And so I think the more that we see people of influence like this talk and be open about this, I think it empowers parents, it empowers students, it empowers churches to say, man, this is a real issue, but I don't have to back down. Right. That as leaders, we don't run from the fire, we run into it, and we're going to, create opportunity for these conversations.
Oh, good. Cool. So we're going to transition here in our subject from roles from parents to churches, but the church role. But there's a word that I've heard a couple times this evening, and that's the word innocence. And we want, as parents, as leaders, we want to protect our children, the innocence of our children. What I'm concerned about is by attempting to protect the innocence of our children, they're going to lose it. It's already been stated, they're going to get educated somewhere. And whether it's in our Sunday school classrooms, which happens, our youth rooms, which happens, whether it's in public school, Christian school, even homeschool, frankly, they're going to get educated. And as parents, as leaders, we want to protect their innocence so much sometimes that we are not addressing the reality of the day that we live in. And so by protecting their innocence, we actually position them to lose their innocence in whatever level, that's going to mean. I've in some of the study that I've done, I find that the ages between 7 and 9 years old is a normal age where children are trying to figure out, they're curious about their sexual identity. And the public schools understand that. And that's why for my entire life, almost, they've gone from high school down to or even nursery school, kindergarten school, into that demographic, 4, 5, 6 years old, because they want to position that child to attack their innocence and destroy it even earlier on. So I'm really thinking that I know that we've talked and put out some numbers there, 11, 12, 13, and maybe before that in some situations. But one of the things we want to do at AMP, one of the many things, is develop some kind of curriculum for parents to be able to communicate to their children. And I'm thinking, how do you talk to a 4-year-old? How do you prepare a 5-year-old? And if society is going after them, we're talking about same-sex issues, we're talking about transsexual is a big deal right now. This isn't just in the world, this is in our families, our homes, our churches. We have to be, as parents, as leaders, we have to be positioned to be able to address that. And I think it's got to be sooner than any of us are comfortable with doing. Anyway, I apologize sort of for that tirade, inserting that. I do have my instructions here that I try to follow, but I don't always do really good with that. So anyway, I'm just very concerned about our children, and Brother Billy, you mentioned one of the reasons why parents have a hard time talking to their children is because they're dealing with it themselves. They're not clean themselves, and so at AMP, we've got a plan. We're working with the parents right now. We want to help the parents get clean and pure, so that they can raise children to emulate that purity, and they can do it in holiness and righteousness.